It's been 50 years since Fordham returned to varsity football, a rout of Georgetown on homecoming at Jack Coffey Field. We welcome in 9 members from that 1970 football team. The starting backfield, Vincent PINO Carlesimo, Randy REIS. Also, Joe Jordan, Paul Tutts, and John Lamello, all freshmen from that team. Don CERRONE, Jerry Crotty, Jim McHugh, and Kevin Sherry. Guys, appreciate all of you being here. Being that it's been 50 years, being that you pulled off such a remarkable victory over Georgetown that day, first I want all of you to reflect on the significance of that performance.
I think that we all had a little bit of trepidation before the game started because they were undefeated, and it was an enormous day on campus that was happening, and we were like part of it, obviously. And I can remember being on the field and standing right 2 or 3 feet away from Mrs. Lombardi and looking at her and just looking at her face and seeing, how important it was for her that this was happening on that day. And I think that, made me feel, much more involved in what was going on. The fact that we had Eric was superb and incredible, and the fact that we had him and Randy in our backfield along with Tommy Harder and Pino also, obviously, but Eric was spectacular. And on that day, I think in particular, he outdid himself in terms of play. And I think that was a credit to all of us, and I know we all remember him. And I think, it's a fantastic day for all. At the end of the day, I think that a lot of us, we were scoring points like pulling rabbits out of a hat. So it was incredible.
Yeah, for me, the significance of the game was obviously because of the Vince Lombardi connection in school. And also, I think it went back a bit. I think for Eric also, it went back to the game the year before. We were on a pretty good undefeated run from '68 through the '69 season. The first 5 games were shutouts, and then we came up to play Georgetown in Georgetown, and they came up with a good scheme, and maybe we were a little overconfident. And they got us, and it hurt, and it stung, and it kind of ruined that season. The end of that season, they knocked out our quarterback, and I think that was kind of the end of the season. But I think that's stuck with those of us who had been on that team and came up to the next season, and we wanted a little bit of revenge, and I think we got it.
What I'd say is what I remember about it, just to echo what Donnie had to say, was just the festivities, the occasion itself. It was a beautiful, beautiful fall day, bright, sunny day, and the campus was mobbed. I think we had 13,000 people in the stands. It was something that we haven't seen much of since, a few occasions, but. And just all the dignitaries that were there. We had the surviving 7 blocks were on the field with us. Being a giant ticket holder, being close to Mara was kind of special, and just the game itself. I mean, when you rush for as many yards as we did, when you're an offensive lineman like myself and Joe and Kevin, you take a special pride. And games like that are few and far between. You totally impose your will on a team, and that's just something I won't forget about that day. It was really spectacular.
Coach Lansing was about business. He'd give you a look that would wither you when you came off the field. He'd look at you and shake his head sometimes. At least he did with me a lot. But he was not a rah-rah guy, but he pointed to the significance of that game. But you guys remember in his pregame talk about, honoring a Fordham legend like Vince Lombardi and the crowd out there. And then so that was his pregame. And then I recall at halftime, he was, all I could think of was that he was proud it was just at halftime. He was, as I say, he was not an emotional guy. He just walked around. He had a little bit of a sly grin on his face. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but that sticks with me from how he sort of set the day up for us.
We also have Randy Rice here, who was a junior running back at the time. You guys have already referenced the performance from Eric Dadd. 235 yards, 3 touchdowns, set a school record at the time that day. Randy, what was it like playing alongside Eric in the backfield?
Well, not just on that day, but that entire season and the year before. I remember feeling fortunate to have Eric on our side like everyone else did. He not only was a very powerful runner, he was so much bigger than most of the running backs of that day and age. I think he was 220 or something like that, but he had good balance. He not only powered ahead, but he was able to do the other tasks for a fullback, and he was a great blocker. So when I was running, he did a wonderful job along with Kevin, Joe, Jim, and the others in clearing holes for us. So we had a strong team from the 69 as well as 70. And I thought, although we knew we were facing a tough team in Georgetown, I don't think we were in awe of them. What I remember more about that day was the butterflies before the game because of the enormity of the crowd. And like Don, being there on the field pre-game right next to Marie Lombardi and Alex Wojciechowicz and these other 7 blocks of granite, even though they were before our era and we didn't know them well, everyone knew Vince Lombardi at that time and probably still does. And it added to the significance of what was happening, and it added to my butterflies. But once we started playing, I think we were highly motivated and things went very well.
We also have Vincent Pino Carlesimo, the starting quarterback, with us from that day. You guys were mentioning it. Everything happened on the ground that day. There wasn't any sort of passing attack that led to the dominant victory. How easy did that make it for you as a quarterback?
Well, very easy given my passing skills. And as to Eric, just briefly, I just want to say, and Randy kind of referenced it, even by today's standards, speed, height, power, Eric Dadd could play college football easily. I was fortunate enough to come around in the times we're talking about, and that gave myself the opportunity to play football. I would hope in today's world they'd let me sit on the bench, but Eric, he was just an exceptional athlete. And so as far as the ground game that day, I did have to go back and watch the films, which my father procured, by the way, from Coach Lansing a year or two later, when he said, "Coach, you don't need those films. Give me them. I need those films." And I saved them all those years and had them digitized, gave them to Crotty, and then Crotty did the magic and spread it throughout Fordham. But every defense presented its own opportunities, and we're talking about the great day that Eric had. It could easily have been Randy's day, because Randy was easily capable of the same type of performance. The defense that day set up for Eric.
That day.
The left side of their defense, the defensive, their right defensive tackle and right defensive end to our left, there was a hole a mile wide there, and we had a slant for Eric off tackle to the left, and I just said, "This is going to go." So play 2, I handed it to Eric. And there was I remember my cousin PJ saying, "That hole, you could have driven a Mack truck through." Right. And Eric went for 45 yards on the first play. So of the first 8 plays, I counted that today. I didn't remember that. On the first 8 plays, Eric carried the ball 4 times, the same play each time. And I would come back to the huddle and I said, "We're going to run this play until they stop it. And if they don't stop it, we'll just run it every time." But that's the way it went. And as the game went on, they became so focused on Eric that it began to open up the middle for Randy. sweeps to Randy. We had a counter play where you'd fake one side to Eric and spin and come back and give it to Randy up the middle. Took a while to soften up that middle because it was so stuffed, but they became so focused on Eric that's why the ground game was unstoppable that day, and that's because of the line, because of the defense they were using, because of Randy, because of Eric, and Jerry. And then when we needed the option, Jerry was there on the option. We would just fake Eric into the middle and toss it out. A little bit of a reflection on the importance of the game. I think the importance of the game can be summed up very easily when I looked at that film today, and I saw my Uncle Pete escorting Mrs. Lombardi off the field, and tears were coming down her eyes. She had the handkerchief in her hand, and that tells us the importance of the game. She told you the importance of the game at that moment. For me, it was probably, I guess, the biggest game I think I played in my career. I knew it going in.
Pino's too modest to tell you, but in those days, plays weren't called from the sideline. The quarterback called the game.
Yeah.
So Pino pitched a perfect game that day, and I do remember he prompted my recollection when he came back in the huddle and said, "Hey, we're going to keep running this until they take it away from us." But Pino figured out the split on their weak side of their defense, and as he told you, and he kept running it and running it and running it. And I think that what really happened in the second half is that Georgetown got out of their game plan, whatever it was, and then they had a move to try and stop Eric. And once they did that, Pino read that perfectly. And I think, Kevin, we took the heart out of him. And I recall that you could just see them sag, somewhere in the middle of the third quarter, maybe toward the end.
You mentioned nerves. One note I found really interesting, Joe Jordan, Paul Tutts, John Lamello, all here, all freshmen back in 1970. The ECAC normally didn't let freshmen play in games like that. Varsity typically didn't allow freshmen. That day, freshmen were allowed to participate. For the three of you, what did that mean?
I grew up on that campus. I lived in the neighborhood, and back then my mother was widowed, and they had this thing, Fordham Day Camp, which was 1950s daycare, So I was there since I was 5 years old. And I was there on the field when Fordham played the NYU, the first game that the club team did. So that was kind of the legacy for us to, get started there. And the other thing too, and there's some of the stuff you reflect back. I mean, I wasn't thinking about that during the game, but I'm glad John mentioned, our coach, because he was an All-American. I mean, this guy was the real thing, played in the Cotton Bowl, and then he flew planes off of the Intrepid, in World War II. And that's the way that generation was. And that's where Lombardi came from. So you have to understand that in 1970, Lombardi was fresh in everyone's memories. And, it was right after the Packers won those back-to-back Super Bowls and everything like that. So it was a big shock. He got sick, and then he was dead. And then having all of the people there, so it lent to the butterflies. It was a really team effort. I mean, Eric got a lot of the press. But there were 4 turnovers. And one of them actually was on a punt. I think you got it, Jerry, right? Right. But the other 3 were on the defensive side. So a lot of times we got the ball, in a great position to score again. So I think it was team effort, great legacy, in terms of, being on that field. And Jim Lansing, who was the coach, and Lombardi from the same ink. So that was the biggest game I ever played in too myself. So we were very, very pleased with it. You had to be doing something right if you were gaining that many yards on the ground.
So first I want to say how welcoming all of the other members of the team were to freshmen. I as an 18-year-old, and Joe and John and Tommy Gogarty and Al Lucia and Billy Dunn, we were playing with guys 3, 4, some 5 years older than us. I mean, guys had been at other schools, other programs. Some guys had been in the service and come back in. So, there was quite an age gap between some of the players, but it did not matter one bit. On some teams, there's a little bit of resentment against, the younger players. Not one bit. at with our group. It did not matter whether you were a freshman or not, and Coach Lansing was a big part of that too. If you're able to play and ready to play, you play.
The upperclassmen, how they treated each other and how they treated the incoming freshman class, it was electric. I mean, it's hard for me to put into words, but I'm going to take you over. I'm in my office here. I'm going to take you over to a wall.
Yeah.
And say, this is my dad and me on the 50-yard line after the game.
Awesome.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that is great.
Sits in my house, and my big brother, who played for the prep, he took that picture. He took that picture, and he had a frame that's been in my house ever since I got out of college. And that's just, I look at that picture, and I not only remember my dad, obviously, but the memories come flooding back to the guys that are on the screen. And and that game was just it epitomized everything great about Fordham football to me when I was there.
I never realized that we had a marching band.
Right.
There were floats. I mean, I wouldn't confuse it for the Rose Bowl parade, but still, it was something that I never realized it actually happened until I saw that DVD.
Don't forget, since that was homecoming, we had the Harvester dance that evening.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, every play was relived during that night about 100 times. But that was a weekend around a football game that everybody on this screen remembers so closely.
That game, I think, was almost meant to be. The way we played, you could not write a better script for a game. You could not do it. It was 39-3 after 3 quarters. I mean, we drive down. The first drive of the game, boom, we go right down the field. We smacked them. And there's a former heavyweight champ who says everybody's got a plan until you get smacked in the face. And you know what? That's kind of funny. But it's true. And in that game, we smacked them. I don't want to say perfection. You can always strive for perfection. But in reality, couldn't really play a better game in every facet of the game that day.
John shared his wall. I had gotten up and got a couple of things that I've kept on the wall in my office also. This is one of them. I don't know if team picture.
Kevin, is that from 70?
Yeah, it is.
That's the 70 team? Okay.
Our students, it was our last home game of the year. Our students went out on the field. I assume it was our students. They went and they tore down the goalpost.
Yeah.
Tore down the goalpost. So when I'm leaving the locker room, half hour later, whatever, someone hands me a piece of wood from the
Great.
Someone hands me a piece of the goalpost, which obviously I've kept for 50 years. But it's really a very cherished possession.
The other goalpost incident against Manhattan. Joe Jordan was famously quoted as saying, I guess those Manhattan kids didn't like goalposts. They tore down the goalpost. I was telling Pino earlier that I was on the bus after the game and somebody screamed, "Put your hats on." And I just got my helmet on and a goalpost came through the window of the bus.
That's exactly right.
Joe, I stopped telling that story because nobody believed it anymore. So it was actually written up in the newspaper. The big kerfuffle, Manny, you wouldn't believe this. I'm glad Paulie got the right idea with the Fordham goalpost from. I had forgotten that, Paul. That's great.
Guys, great memories. A day to remember for sure. Vince Lombardi remembered, and a 39-17 win over Georgetown. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate you joining the virtual homecoming this year.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Very
man.
enjoyable.
Thanks, man. Great to see everybody.
Yeah, great to see everyone.
Randy, take care.
There's a
Kevin,
picture
good
of
to see
Eric
you, Donnie.
scoring a
Good
touchdown.
to see you guys. What's
Bye-bye.
that?
We made a lot of people proud that day.
Yes, we did.